Good day, everyone. Today we explore how religious institutions worldwide are becoming powerful catalysts for climate action. Faith communities possess unique qualities that make them particularly effective in environmental advocacy. They have established networks reaching billions of people, moral authority that transcends political boundaries, and theological frameworks that naturally support environmental stewardship. This module examines the various ways religious institutions contribute to climate solutions through advocacy, sustainable practices, and justice-focused initiatives. Here, we'll explore how faith communities tackle climate change, drawing on their unique moral frameworks and vast networks. We'll see how they mobilize members, influence policy, implement sustainable practices, and champion climate justice. This module will equip you to design effective faith-based climate initiatives, bridging spiritual values with practical environmental solutions. We'll start by understanding religion's unique role in driving climate engagement, exploring how theological imperatives motivate environmental action. Then, we'll look at institutional advocacy, from local policy work to international climate conferences. Next, we'll focus on practical sustainability measures within faith communities. We'll also examine interfaith collaboration and address climate justice through religious frameworks. Finally, you'll develop concrete action planning skills for faith-based climate engagement. Faith communities bring unique strengths to climate advocacy. Their moral and spiritual authority helps bridge political divides and reach audiences secular groups often can't. They frame climate action as a sacred duty, not just a policy choice. Plus, religious institutions have established global networks and trusted leadership, enabling swift mobilization for environmental causes. Across diverse religious traditions, we discover remarkably consistent theological foundations for environmental stewardship. Christianity highlights humanity's role as caretakers of God's creation, while Islam views nature as sacred signs requiring protection. Hindu and Buddhist traditions emphasize the interconnectedness of all life, and Judaism teaches responsibility for tikkun olam, repairing the world. These imperatives offer powerful motivation, extending beyond scientific arguments to appeal to believers' deepest spiritual convictions about their purpose and responsibilities. Here, we distinguish between faith-based and secular climate approaches, highlighting the unique contributions of religious communities. Secular campaigns focus on scientific data and policy, while faith-based approaches ground environmental action in moral obligation and sacred teachings. Religious efforts emphasize intergenerational justice, spiritual practices, and leverage existing faith networks. Critically, faith-based groups don't ignore science. They integrate it with spiritual motivation for powerful, emotionally resonant calls to action. Here, we see how theological principles drive real environmental action globally. In India, Hindu communities use ancient sacred grove concepts for huge reforestation efforts. Canadian churches weave environmental stewardship into their core mission. Islamic organizations in Indonesia leverage Friday prayers to share climate messages with millions. These religious teachings offer powerful motivation, effectively complementing scientific arguments for climate action. Let's consider why faith-based environmental messages often resonate more deeply than purely scientific appeals. Religious frameworks create deep emotional connections, linking environmental concerns to personal spiritual beliefs and community identity, moving beyond abstract data. Faith communities provide ready-made networks for collective action, and their teachings offer moral imperatives that motivate sustained engagement. This combination of emotional resonance, community support, and moral authority makes faith-based climate messaging particularly powerful. Religious institutions engage in climate advocacy at multiple levels. At the local level, they mobilize congregations for community projects and influence municipal policies. Nationally, they lobby governments through their networks and participate in consultations. Internationally, they coordinate global campaigns and participate in conferences. This multi-level approach empowers faith communities to address climate change through both grassroots action and high-level policy influence. These influential declarations highlight how religious leadership shapes global climate discourse. Pope Francis's Laudato Si established environmental care as a core Catholic responsibility, influencing institutional policies worldwide. The Islamic Declaration frames environmental protection through Quranic teachings, reaching Muslim communities globally. Similarly, Buddhist and Jewish declarations ground climate action in their respective theological traditions, providing communities with authoritative frameworks for engagement. faith representatives have become increasingly influential at UN climate conferences, demonstrating religion's growing role in international climate policy. At COP21 in Paris, interfaith leaders delivered petitions with 1.8 million signatures, showing the mobilization capacity of religious networks. COP26 in Glasgow featured a dedicated faith pavilion hosting over 20 events, whilst faith leaders met directly with government negotiators. This presence ensures that moral and ethical dimensions are included in climate policy discussions. Here, we see how religious leaders act as crucial climate influencers. They leverage their moral authority through sermons and public statements, framing climate action as a spiritual imperative. For instance, Indonesian imams reach over 200 million Muslims with environmental messages in their Friday sermons. Beyond this, leaders mobilize their communities for practical action and engage in direct policy advocacy, using their influence to shape environmental decisions. This exercise helps us explore how faith communities develop authentic climate position statements. It's crucial that these statements root environmental concern in sacred texts and theological teachings, connecting climate action to core values. They should identify specific climate issues relevant to the community and offer practical calls to action. The example demonstrates how Christian traditions might frame climate action through compassion and stewardship. Around the world, faith communities are actively translating their spiritual teachings into tangible environmental action. This means greening sacred spaces with renewable energy, practicing sustainable land management, and making ethical investment decisions that align with their core values. These are concrete ways religious institutions are embodying their environmental commitments and reducing their ecological footprint. Across the globe, places of worship are putting their spiritual values into practice with sustainable initiatives. More than 6,000 religious buildings now have solar panels, often seen as harnessing the light of God in a very tangible way. The Church of England, for example, aims for net zero emissions by 2030 across its 16,000 churches. Similarly, eco-synagogues and green mosques are integrating environmental care into their daily operations through things like energy efficiency and waste reduction programs. Religious institutions collectively own an estimated 8% of habitable land worldwide, creating enormous potential for environmental impact through responsible land management. Catholic religious orders operate nearly 200,000 organic farms globally, demonstrating how spiritual values can guide agricultural practices. Sikh Gurdwaras maintain community gardens that provide food whilst teaching environmental stewardship. Buddhist monasteries preserve biodiversity through traditional conservation practices. This land ownership represents a significant opportunity for faith-based environmental action. Faith-based divestment from fossil fuels is a powerful financial expression of religious environmental commitment. Over 300 religious organizations spanning Catholic, Protestant, Jewish, Islamic, Buddhist, and Hindu traditions have already withdrawn more than $40 billion from fossil fuel investments. They are actively redirecting $24 billion into clean energy and sustainable development. This shows how religious institutions are aligning their financial power with their environmental values to support climate solutions. Let's explore some practical, low-cost sustainability ideas for faith centers. We're looking at things like energy efficiency through LED lighting and programmable thermostats, which can cut energy use by 30 to 50%. We can also consider waste reduction with composting or water conservation using low-flow fixtures. These high-impact practices empower faith communities to embody their environmental values effectively, even with limited budgets. Environmental challenges extend beyond religious lines, offering powerful chances for collaboration among faith traditions. When diverse faiths come together for climate action, they show that protecting our shared planet is a universal spiritual duty. Interfaith networks harness the moral authority of many voices speaking as one, share resources and infrastructure, and connect with followers across different cultures and politics. This collaboration significantly boosts the impact of individual faith communities. Let's look at some major interfaith climate networks and how they're demonstrating the power of religious collaboration. For example, Green Faith works in 16 countries, training over 10,000 faith leaders in climate advocacy. The Interfaith Rainforest Initiative focuses on protecting tropical forests, mobilizing religious communities to support indigenous protectors. And Interfaith Power and Light assists over 20,000 congregations across 40 U.S. states in reducing their carbon footprints. These examples clearly show how diverse religious traditions can collaborate effectively on environmental issues. Here we see some powerful examples of successful interfaith climate campaigns. The Our Voices campaign, for instance, gathered 1.8 million faith-based signatures, significantly influencing the Paris Climate Agreement. Another impactful effort, the Faith for Earth Coalition, secured commitments from 50 financial institutions to align their investments with climate goals, and Faiths for Forests successfully protected over 200,000 hectares of endangered rainforest. As Gopal Patel wisely states, when we speak with a unified voice, decision makers cannot ignore the moral dimension of climate action. Building effective interfaith climate relationships requires careful attention to both commonalities and differences. We start by identifying shared moral principles across traditions. All major faiths teach stewardship, compassion, and intergenerational responsibility. While respecting distinctive theological approaches, we focus on common environmental goals. Christians, Muslims, Jews, Hindus, and Buddhists may have different reasons for environmental care, but they can unite around shared practical objectives for protecting creation. Today, we're exploring the extensive network of interfaith environmental organizations operating globally. You'll see major networks like the World Council of Churches Climate Program, Islamic Foundation for Ecology, and Jewish Climate Action Network. Hindu and Buddhist groups, such as Bhumi Global and the International Network of Engaged Buddhists, offer unique perspectives. The Parliament of World Religions, Climate Action Task Force also coordinates efforts across traditions. Understanding this landscape is key to finding partners for collaborative environmental action. Climate justice means recognizing that environmental harms hit vulnerable communities hardest, even though they've contributed least to the problem. Faith traditions offer powerful ways to tackle these injustices. They emphasize justice, compassion, and caring for the marginalized. Religious communities are uniquely positioned for this work, blending moral authority with practical resources, strong community ties, and theological principles demanding protection of the vulnerable. Sacred texts from various faith traditions offer strong calls for justice and protecting the vulnerable. For example, the Hebrew Bible urges us to seek justice, rescue the oppressed. The Quran emphasizes standing firm for justice, even when challenging, and Sikh teachings highlight safeguarding the weak from unjust power. These core beliefs establish climate justice as a profound religious imperative, moving beyond just environmental issues to tackle systemic inequalities and support those most impacted by climate change. Faith communities are at the forefront, responding to climate impacts through both immediate disaster relief and long-term adaptation support. For instance, after Cyclone Idai, churches in Mozambique sheltered 160,000 displaced people, showcasing the rapid mobilization of religious networks. Islamic organizations are providing drought relief across Africa, and Buddhist communities are supporting climate refugees in Asia. These examples highlight how religious institutions act as crucial safety nets, offering spiritual care alongside practical assistance to climate-affected populations. Faith communities increasingly recognize that environmental and social justice are inseparable. Pope Francis articulates this in Laudato Si', stating we face one complex crisis, which is both social and environmental. This integrated eco-justice framework addresses resource access and distribution, intergenerational equity, rights of indigenous peoples, and global economic systems. Religious communities are well positioned to advocate for this holistic approach because their theological traditions naturally connect care for creation with care for the vulnerable. These case studies demonstrate how faith communities translate climate justice principles into action. Living the change encourages personal commitments, drawing on religious teachings like aparigraha for reduced consumption. The Season of Creation unites Christians globally in environmental advocacy. These initiatives highlight how theological principles effectively inspire practical climate action for vulnerable communities. This role-play exercise will help you understand how faith leaders might respond to climate disasters in their communities. The scenario, involving coastal flooding displacing 200 low-income families, reflects real climate justice challenges. As you participate, consider how different religious leaders might draw upon their traditions to advocate for affected families, coordinate community response, and address systemic inequities. This activity shows how faith-based climate justice principles apply in crisis situations. Faith communities can take practical, impactful action on climate change by developing structured plans aligned with their values, resources, and context. Your effective faith-based climate action plans should integrate institutional changes, educational programs, community engagement, and advocacy efforts. Remember to ground environmental initiatives in theological foundations, ensuring they are achievable within your community's capacity. This systematic approach moves you from good intentions to concrete environmental impact. Here we outline 4 key dimensions for faith-based climate action. First, institutional changes cover things like energy audits, sustainable purchasing, and zero-waste events within your facilities. Next, educational initiatives integrate eco-theology into sermons and foster climate study groups. Community engagement focuses on service projects and sustainable lifestyle programs. Finally, advocacy involves policy engagement and public witness. This multi-dimensional approach helps our faith communities tackle climate change from every angle. When setting climate goals, it's crucial they are SMART. That means specific, like install LED lighting, not just save energy. They need to be measurable, such as reduce energy use by 20%, so we can track progress. Ensure goals are achievable with your community's resources, relevant to your faith values, and time-bound for accountability. This approach helps create realistic and impactful environmental objectives for your community. Here's a great example from St. Mark's Episcopal Church. They created an achievable 6-month climate plan. It started with a creation care team and an energy audit, then moved into education and practical changes like LED lights. Notice how they blended internal improvements with external engagement through interfaith work and advocacy. This really shows how systematic planning helps faith communities achieve significant environmental progress. To successfully tackle climate action in your faith community, you'll need to effectively mobilize both human and financial resources. Start by identifying environmental champions within your congregation and forming dedicated green teams with clear roles. Remember, youth groups are often eager to get involved. Partnering with local environmental organizations and other faith communities can help share resources and expertise. And don't forget to integrate climate initiatives into your budgeting and seek out rebates and incentives to maximize financial efficiency. When faith communities pursue climate action, we often face 2 key challenges. First, theological resistance may arise if members question if environmental work aligns with our mission. We address this by grounding initiatives in scripture and tradition, starting with small projects and connecting them to established religious values. Second, many communities struggle with tight budgets. We can overcome this by phasing projects, seeking grants, and focusing on low-cost, high-impact measures to demonstrate stewardship within financial constraint. To measure our impact, we'll track both quantitative metrics and qualitative changes. This includes concrete data like energy use reduction, waste diverted, water conserved, and carbon footprint reduction. We'll also track participation in our environmental programs. Qualitative assessment helps us understand shifts in community awareness, how environmental themes are integrated into worship, and increased advocacy. This comprehensive approach helps us understand our environmental impact and identify areas for continued improvement. Here's an activity to help you develop practical skills for faith-based climate action planning. Start by selecting a faith community you know well. Assess their current environmental practices and opportunities, and identify theological motivations that will resonate. Choose 3 to 5 priority actions across institutional, educational, community, and advocacy. Develop SMART goals with clear timelines, identify resources and potential barriers, and create simple metrics for measuring success. As we wrap up, let's review the key takeaways for faith-based climate action. First, religious institutions bring unique resources and moral authority, using their global reach to frame climate action as a moral imperative. Second, these faith-based approaches truly complement scientific and policy efforts by adding emotional resonance and community mobilization. Third, interfaith collaboration is vital. Uniting diverse traditions amplifies our collective impact. And finally, remember that climate justice is a core religious imperative, linking care for creation directly with caring for the vulnerable. In our upcoming module, we'll dive into how faith-based ethical frameworks align with and enhance sustainable development goals. We will explore connections between religious ethics and sustainability principles, analyze faith community contributions to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and discuss how religious teachings can guide sustainable development practices. This module naturally builds on our previous discussion of faith-based climate action by expanding to broader sustainability challenges and opportunities. These questions are designed to help us consolidate our learning and encourage deeper reflection. As you discuss, consider how your faith tradition understands humanity's relationship with nature and which teachings address environmental responsibility. Let's also think practically: what climate actions can your community implement soon? What resources are needed? And what barriers might you face? Finally, explore interfaith opportunities and how religious communities can contribute to climate justice.